Hello, welcome back to Communing Holy Spirit, where we talk about faith, hope, and most of all, love. Today, we are going to continue teaching from our Godly Emotional Refinement resource, continuing to talk on how being loosed from the snares of anger is by continuing to follow after God. And the biblical figure that we're going to be talking about is Moses, and how when he was leading the Israelites through the wilderness, the task of leading the Israelites had gotten to him, and he had become gripped by anger. And in that grip of anger, he performed an action that got him rejected from entering the promised land. And so this action came when he was to speak to the rock, but he struck it twice. Now, when we look into this in a deep dive, why did this action get him pushed out of the promised land? Now, when they were walking through Zin didn't have any water, and it was a test by God because God knew where they were at. God knew where he was driving them, but the Israelites had kept complaining. They weren't looking for solutions. They kept wanting a way out. They kept wanting to take charge of the mission, but God was in control, and they were still grappling with walking by the flesh or walking by faith. And Moses was the head of that operation. And so when they were going without water, the effects of the wilderness, having to be dependent on God, coming out of slavery, having to rest on a God that's not an idol or a calf, that's not self-help, but just pure grace. And this was new to them, and they were surrounded by all of this desert. Where were they going to get water? Where were they going to get their needs met? And so the complaining bubbled up rather than the venting. And so Moses went to God and asked God for help. He vented to God. He told them, hey, these Israelite people, they're not listening to me. They're not doing what you need me to do. What do you need me to do, God? And then God responded and gave him instructions and told him what to do. He said, go and speak to the rock and water will flow. However, when he went to go to the rock, the Israelites had been assembled, and when he saw them, he said, you rebels. And he was just probably remembering all of the frustrations from being the head of this operation and leading them through, how they were horses that were biting the bridle, who were resisting the leading of God. And so when God had just given Moses the instructions, Moses went in front of the Israelites, but he couldn't hear the word of the Lord through the negative emotion of anger. And so it caused him to walk in disobedience in front of the Israelite people. Instead of speaking to the rock, he struck it. And so this anger wasn't resisted, and Moses rendered the justice himself. He didn't let the grace do the talking of just speaking to the rock. He let the striking do the talking in attempts to try and control the Israelites, in attempts to trying to get them to understand what they needed to understand. Now, the truth is, yes, trust God. The truth was, believe God. But it's not in hitting or forcing a miracle to happen that God can be displayed. It's by speaking. And we see this with Elijah as well. He wasn't in the fire. He wasn't in all of those things. He was in the whisper. And then Elijah went out of the cave, right? It is grace. It is by speaking and agreeing with the words of God that he can release the witness. And when the witness is released, the confirmation of God's presence becomes clear. But he didn't do this because he had been gripped with anger, and he wanted the Israelites to start trusting God and to start believing God and in his own power of wanting this so much instead of trusting God's way to bring this about. He struck the rock with the staff instead of just speaking to it. And this revealed where godly character was needed. It was needed because God wanted to set the picture, the true picture of grace bringing about the needs of God, not the works of the flesh. And this was to be set as an example of leadership and why Moses couldn't go in, because that yeast, that representation could not follow the Israelite people into the promised land, because the promised land represented nothing of Egypt, nothing of works of the flesh, just pure grace. And in that moment, it did not represent that. And so the Lord did not want to have that picture. And if you'd like to know more about our deep dive into the study of Moses and how he became gripped with anger, you can check out our Godly Emotional Refinement resource. And thank you so much for joining us. The next lesson will be up soon. God bless you.